Hey, how you doing? Today, it's Perkins. So, I thought the weather's getting a little warmer. I might have one of those triple-decker club sandwiches. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah. Okay. Turkey, ham, bacon, cheese, tomato. It's got everything. A couple fries, too. Yeah. I'll save that other half for later. Yeah. Oh. Gotta have some ketchup, too. Not bad. And of course, I've got my iced tea. So I was thinking today about the old stereo system that my parents had when I was a kid. It was built into a wood cabinet, and it was probably like 4 foot long and 1.5 feet or so deep, and about 3 foot tall. That was the first stereo I think I ever remember. And it was almost the way they built the TVs and stuff back then, too. They had them in a wood cabinet. So the 2 speakers for the stereo were built in the 2 sides on the lower part of the cabinet. And then there was the AM/FM tuner with the dial on it and stuff, just to listen to radio stations, you know. And then the turntable part. And with the turntable, of course, they could play the different sizes of records that they had. So they had some 45s, and you would put that little adapter in this on the center pin for the 45s. Mostly my mom had those because she was like a big Elvis fan, you know, from back in his younger days. And then my dad mostly listened to country, like Johnny Cash and stuff. Now the turntable was set on the one side, and the tuner was there right beside it. And of course, it had a wooden lid that you lift up and down. It had a second wooden lid also, that if you open that, that had the reel-to-reel tape deck. So in that compartment, it also had like a storage space where you could put the two microphones and stuff, like these huge microphones to record onto the reel-to-reel tape deck. And so when we were kids, a lot of times when my dad was at work and stuff, my mom would have all of us kids learning nursery rhymes. So we would be reciting nursery rhymes and stuff with her. In the evenings and stuff, like I said, when my dad was at work. And then on the weekends, of course, they would have a bunch of the relatives over and stuff. And a lot of the guys would bring their guitars and banjos and stuff. And it would be like regular country recording night, you know, set up the two microphones and all that. So that stereo for a while sat in the dining room at our house because the living room wasn't finished yet or anything. And so one weekend, my dad decided to begin remodeling. It had a big archway that went into the kitchen from the dining room. Then it had another archway that went into the living room from the dining room. Then it had a third archway that went into a hallway where there were two bedrooms and the hall bathroom. Well, I'm pretty sure my dad didn't like all those archways that were coming and going from the dining room. So he decided one weekend he was going to make things look more open in the house. So he went out to the garage and got a sledgehammer. And like I said, this was the beginning of his career of remodeling. And he decided to take out the kitchen wall. So the archway came up across and it had a small, maybe 4-foot piece of the wall there. And he proceeded to bust down the top half of the wall. And his theory was he was going to put a bar there so it would look more open instead of, you know, just a closed up wall look. He didn't like that closed up wall. Well, it worked. He figured out what was in the wall and how to remove it and stuff like that. So once he had a couple of holes knocked through the wall and he could see where the 2x4s and stuff were, then he got the old wood saw and measured it up the height he wanted the bar to be at and cut all those 2x4s even. And then went to the ceiling with his saw and cut them all off at the ceiling. And so he had the right height for his bar. Worked out okay. It was a little crude there in the beginning. And then put a bar top on it and stuff. Finished off the wall and the ceiling and stuff. Turned out pretty good. And that was the beginning of the remodeling at that house. That's sort of how it all started. The other thing I always thought was new and interesting in that time frame was a thing called like a light organ. So there were these two boxes, sort of rectangle in shape, and they had like a vinyl wavy lens material on the face of them with colored lights behind that lens, and you would hook them to your stereo on the sound output, and they would flash different colored lights in different arrangements and organizations to make different patterns on that like vinyl lens. And so they would strobe different colors to the music. And once he got that bar squared away in between the dining room and the kitchen, he mounted one of those up in each of toward the ceiling in each of the corners. And so now they had the stereo that flashed the music and everything with the lights, you know. There was a bunch of stuff in that time frame around the early 70s with Radio Shack and Heathkit, and there was some other organizations too that would sell these kits, you know, that you could build them at home, you know what I mean? You know, and that was the beginning of the whole transistor era and stuff, when things were really getting big achievements in sort of electronics and stuff. Radio Shack also came out with like project kits, you know, to teach young kids and stuff how to do some stuff with electronics. So I got this thing called like a 86-in-1 project kit, and it had a little wooden box, and it had the components on it that you could wire it to make different projects. And this little booklet explaining, which wire to connect to which thing. And it didn't require soldering or anything because it was spring loaded. So there were these little springs that stuck up out of the electronic control board. And you would just take a wire the right length, hook it onto one spring, say that went to a battery, and then string it over and hook it under the other spring that went to, like, a transistor or something. And you would build these little arrangements of wires to make different things. Like you could make Morse code oscillating noise. You could build a little AM radio out of the thing. All sorts of little projects, But like I was saying, that was the beginning of the remodeling phase of that house. Now, shortly after that, he bought more tools because he knew we were going to do more projects. There were other rooms that needed refinished and stuff. One of the coolest things that he bought that really helped save some time, and probably the most expensive tools that he bought, was Sears had a radial arm saw. So, you can move the angle of the saw from the top, and then you could rotate the handle of the saw. So you could make a really big variety of like compound angles and stuff like that to do trim and molding work. It was really handy for that. One of the next rooms that he decided we should rehab was the basement. It had an unfinished basement, just a cement floor. So we moved on to that, got that finished up as like a rec room, We actually raised the floor, so we had like a subfloor because, the concrete on the basement floor, you couldn't do much with, and it was not real even and stuff. So we just stood 2x4s on their edges, framed it all in, and then put plywood on top of it, so that then you could lay carpet on top of that, you know what I mean? That was also one of the first jobs that we did where I learned how to put in drop ceiling, with the grid work and everything. And of course, paneling was big in the early 70s. So we put paneling on the walls. And one thing with paneling was it was really big at the time, but it was a finished product. So you didn't have to do the drywall with taping the seams and everything and then painting the room and stuff. It was big in the early 70s. That's also where I first learned how to do, you know, house wiring with receptacles, because we added receptacles everywhere. We had to wire the lights in and stuff, of course, and switches for lights and everything. So in that job, I learned a lot about the wiring, you know, basic wiring stuff. But that room turned out pretty good. We did we put the floor down first, and then we did the paneling stuff, and then we put the drop ceiling in. Once the floor and everything was in, the room was basically done. Then he just had somebody come install carpet. But it made a nice rec room down there, you know. Then, of course, he got like a TV and some furniture, chairs and stuff. And the room was rectangle shaped. It was quite a bit longer than it was wide because it was on half of the basement of the house. And I remember the one end of the room was more open because the TV and the sofa and chairs and stuff fit down to one end. So at that point was the first I remember us getting like aquariums, you know, and fish and stuff. So then it was just one room after another. There was three of the big rooms that needed done. We did that rec room. Then we moved back from the the basement rec room to get the living room totally fixed up. In that living room too, he decided to get sort of fancy with his woodworking ability once he had that radial arm saw. And in the one corner, he put in a bookcase. So he got this like more expensive grade of wood. It wasn't just pine, but it was birch or poplar or something. Put this bookcase in the corner, and by that point there was like plexiglass. So he put these plexiglass doors on the bookcase and stuff. Turned out pretty good. That thing was there, you know, even after we sold the house. And then one of the next rooms that needed some rehab was in the upstairs. One of the rooms, you know, which was going to be a bedroom, was never finished. So I'm not sure why it was never finished, but it never was. So that was the next room to be rehabbed, you know. And we got that room done. Then all three of the bedrooms upstairs were finished. Those were the biggest projects, you know, that we did for rehabbing. But in the early years, it helped me learn because I was working with them on the weekends and stuff, getting them done. You know, so over that time, I learned how to do the basic rehab stuff that you need to know for projects that you're going to do around your house, you know, stuff like that. Worked out pretty good. But that's going to wrap it up for that meal. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you later.